Hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to cover a lot of information today, and we're very happy that you decided to join us. So moving forward, very important during the course of the webinar, ask questions. If they pop up in your head, share them with us. Post them at any time using the control panel over on the side there. Any questions that can't be answered and addressed during the Q&A, because I get a little carried away sometimes, nerding out on safety stuff and talking ANSI, and if you attend my ADA webinars, things like that, I get a little carried away with information. I'm going to try to move really quickly through this. So if I don't have enough time to get through all of the questions, which is usually the case at the end, I'll get through a bunch of them, but not all of them. We'll follow up with via email with the questions and answers to those questions, so you have a list of those to go through. The webinar will be recorded and available on demand and sent to you in a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. My co-presenter who's listening in right now and I will work really hard the second it is done to start getting everything ready for you and get that out to you. We're going to launch poll questions throughout the presentation. Your participation is really greatly appreciated in those. It helps us to further communicate with you, for us to help to continue to improve this product and make it better for you. Follow-up survey will be sent after the webinar, and you'll be given a $5 Starbucks gift card bribe for your participation, which is again greatly appreciated. My name is Justin Dunn. I am the sales product specialist and trainer for Haas. That's my mugshot on the right there, although that's not quarantine Justin. I think I look quite a bit different with the quarantine beard and everything right now. With me is Nicole Dennison, our marketing manager, running everything behind the scenes right now, making sure that this goes smoothly. Nicole, do you want to say hi real quick?
Good morning, everybody. Again, thanks for attending. And yeah, I'm on the back end monitoring questions. Anything that you have, please submit, and either Justin will tackle at the end of the webinar, or we'll get these questions sent out with full answers as a resource for you moving forward. So again, thanks for attending.
Excellent, thanks Nicole. And our topics today are going to include what is the ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 standard, what are the significant requirements of the standard and how to test for those requirements, best practices for emergency equipment. We think our experience with safety equipment, eyewashes and safety showers, and our long history with such has really given us a lot of insight into some additional steps you should be taking. So I'll share those with you. And then we'll end with the live Q&A. Now, if you're not familiar with who OSHA is, they are the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and they are the agency that's responsible for regulating emergency shower and eyewash facilities. Now, the reason I bring this up is because OSHA has their own standard, aside from the ANSI ISEA Z358.1, and that's 29 CFR 1910.151C under medical services and first aid. And the only real guidance we get from OSHA as to emergency equipment is this paragraph right here. And what it says is, where the eyes or body of any person that may be exposed to injurious corrosive materials, suitable facilities for quick drenching or flushing of the eyes and body shall be provided within the work area for immediate emergency use. This is really important. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us any guidance. It doesn't tell us how to accomplish this and how to make sure that my facility is compliant. So that's where ANSI ISEA Z358.1 comes in. The most important goals that we're trying to accomplish here in covering this and covering 29 CFR and Z358.1 is injury and fatality prevention, lowering general workplace risk, and lowering lost time and money for you and for your employees. or you as the employee and your employer, right? Regarding litigation, and a lot of other factors. I mean, if you're in a facility and your expectation is that you are covered as far as first aid goes, you have an incident and you get some nasty chemicals in your eyes, and it turns out that the Eyewash isn't working correctly, that Z358.1 wasn't followed, that we're working with non-compliant emergency equipment in the facility, there's likely going to be legal consequences to that. So following Z358.1 is really going to help mitigate all of this. Now, OSHA has, if you're not familiar, has stepped up enforcement, particularly for employers who have a history of serious or repeated violations. On August 1st, 2016, OSHA fines actually increased for the first time since 1990. It was by 80%, which was kind of a shock to everybody. Effective January 2nd, 2018, OSHA fines have increased by an additional 2%, and that'll be year over year to account for inflation now, which they weren't doing before, which is how we got that big, scary 80%. Now, this slide's just a great example of some fines and some penalties across the US, just to give you a really good example of some violations specific to emergency eye washes and showers. There is, where is it? A monster on this page over on the top right-hand corner. Cinnamon Sin, New Jersey, Transaxle LLC. $382,605 total penalty. The violation was failure to provide adequate eye washes for employees exposed to hazardous substances. It must have been the majority of the facility, just based on this. This is all public information, by the way. You can go look these up if you need more examples. They can be sometimes a little difficult to find. You know, when something like this happens in a facility, people really try their best not to broadcast it, right? But we'll be sharing this after the fact, so if you need these examples, you'll have them. Moving on, what is the ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 standard? Now, it was written by the International Safety Equipment Association, you know them as the ISEA. ANSI defines emergency eye wash and shower design, location, and temperature requirements for proper functionality as used. So ISEA wrote it, ANSI adopted it and distributes it, and OSHA references it as the primary source for compliance with their own standard, with 1910.151C during site inspections and site visits. So really important to note, this isn't an OSHA standard. It's not something that they've necessarily, what people would say, have adopted. It's something that they say, if you want to comply with our standard, you're going to have to look at the Z358.1 standard. Now, the standard itself was first published in 1981. It's had several revisions since, in 1990, 1998, 2004, 2009, and lastly, most recently in 2014. It's in need of update, which will hopefully happen in the next couple of years. In 2009, some of the most important revisions to the standard included a temperature range for water delivery, simultaneous use, which was huge, as well as the temperature range, eye wash testing requirements, and then in 2014, a lot of the changes were more geared towards manufacturers standardizing how the equipment's created, measurements, and things like that. So design, manufacture, and installation of the emergency showers, emergency equipment installation location, and some adjusted measurements to the heights and things like that. So to start, we've got our first poll question, and then we'll launch right into the standard. So Nicole, if you would launch that for us, pretty please.
Okay, which describes your role in choosing showers and eye and face washes? All right, I'll give you just a couple more seconds to cast your vote. All right. Thanks, Justin.
Okay, thank you. And moving on, and I was just looking at my control panel. Thanks again to everybody for attending today. We have a really big audience today. It's really great to see that everybody showed up. So I appreciate it. Thank you. So moving on, what are the significant requirements and how do you test for those requirements? First and foremost, weekly testing and annual inspections. ANSI requires a weekly minimum performance test. Has to be done on a weekly basis. This is for all emergency eye washes, safety showers, portable equipment, plumbed equipment, it doesn't matter. And the process for this is really very simple. It's a very easy test. All that is required is that you activate the equipment and you ensure there's enough, that there's water flow to the heads of the device, right? That it's usable basically. And that the duration of the activation is long enough to clear out all of the stagnant water that's sitting in the dead leg portion of the pipe. So you've got that pipe behind the wall. There's a certain distance between that piece of emergency equipment and the water source. Now, if that water sits in there too long, we're gonna get growth. We're gonna get nasty stuff built up in that pipe. We don't wanna be shooting that into somebody's eyes. It could create complications after the fact if we're talking about Legionella and some other hot topic nasty stuff that could be growing in the pipe. So we have to be sure that we're just running it long enough to clear out that dead leg so we're not getting all that growth in there. And a sure sign of that is you're going to turn it on, you're going to start seeing discolored water. I actually have a whole file of some of the nasty water I've seen coming out of these pieces of equipment, from yellow to brown to like pitch black. Like we thought they struck oil, and it was so gross. So make sure you're clearing out those dead legs. But that's all that's required on a weekly basis. Now, for portable equipment versus plumbed equipment, on portable equipment, obviously you don't want to actually activate the equipment. There's an exception when it comes to portable equipment, and it still has to get a weekly check, but you are to visit the equipment, visually check the portable equipment to ensure that it's capable of delivering a full 15-minute flush, and that's it. Make sure the tank is full. If you're using a cartridge type of equipment, that does still have to be activated on an annual basis, but on a weekly basis, you're just making sure that it's unpunctured, it's full, and you're good to go. Now, the annual inspection is something else entirely. Now, on an annual basis, once a year, ideally, and I know a lot of people do these on like the most ideal time of year, like it's June, it's nice and warm out, but not too hot. But I really suggest testing these pieces of equipment more towards your worst times of year, right? You want this is informational for you. You want to learn and discover the things that are wrong with your pieces of emergency equipment. Now, an annual test is a head-to-toe test, everything. You have to test the temperature, activate it. It has to run for a full 15 minutes, which can be difficult in certain situations, but there's equipment out there to help you accomplish that, and it needs to be done to ensure that it is capable of doing so. And to help accomplish that, we'll send this to you after the webinar here, but this is actually a checklist that we've put together. Nicole and I have worked pretty hard on ourselves even, and can really help you with that annual performance check and to document those in your facility too. So we'll send you that for free after the webinar. Some of the tools that you're going to need to perform these tests and on a weekly or annual basis is a tape measure, of course. Eyewash gauge, our model is a 9015. You can see the little eyewash gauge there below the bucket. And I'll explain how all of this gets used. You'll need a 5-gallon bucket with the 2-gallon water line marked. You'll need a shower sock and pole, which is really going to help you prevent a mess, a huge mess, right? We want to contain that water as much as possible. If you've never turned on a drench shower, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's designed drench you immediately. It's a lot of water very quickly. So having that shower sock and pole is really important. Thermometer so that we can check the temperature of the water, and an ANSI checklist is ideal. Again, we're going to send you that one, so you'll have a good tool to share with you and your team or print out and whatever you want to use it for. So to begin, the first requirement other than testing that I want to talk about is that the equipment needs to be accessible within 10 seconds or 55 feet. Now, originally it was just 10 seconds, but 10 seconds can be very difficult for us to measure. We're all built differently. We can cover a certain amount of ground differently between all of us. 10 seconds distance is not the same for all of us. So they added an addendum to the standard, which said, hey, measure 55 feet. That's a measurable solid distance that you can measure from hazard to emergency equipment. To test that, you're just going to want to check for the proximity of the hazard. Get out the tape measure, or if you have a laser measure, either is fine, but measure that distance and ensure that it's within that 55 feet. Now, 55 feet is a maximum too. We can't go beyond that, but it can be as close as possible as it needs to be for the type of hazard that you're dealing with, right? Sometimes it's safe to put the emergency equipment immediately adjacent to a hazard. Other times you're dealing with maybe a tank that could rupture and spray hazardous materials, and it wouldn't be ideal to put the equipment directly next to it, right? So we have to think about where a safe place within that 55 feet would be to place equipment. Next, it needs to be located on the same level as the hazard, okay? Now, this is a really simple, actually that photo immediately to the right of that just shows a couple steps. This is an area where you are stepping down to a piece of emergency equipment. It's also faced the wrong way, and it has to be free of obstructions too. So this could be a stepping, a change in level hazard. It could be a tripping hazard, but we cannot make a change in level to a piece of emergency equipment. It has to be on the same exact floor. So no stairs, no change in levels when it comes to the equipment. There is an exception to that, one single exception that I'll cover later on in the presentation, also included in the addendum. So free of obstructions can be anything. It's incredibly important. You can see another couple photos there on the right. I have a treasure trove of them. Unfortunately, emergency equipment, a lot of the time, it goes in the corner of your facility and people eventually, they forget about it and it collects debris, toolboxes and carts and mops and garbage cans and all kinds of stuff over in the corner that can block your ability to reach the emergency equipment. We have to make sure all of that is out of the way. Also look for hoses and piping, tripping hazards and things like that. We don't want to create you know, like an American Ninja Warrior situation here. You know, it doesn't need to be an obstacle course to get to the first aid station. So keep that completely clear and make sure there's no hazards that are going to trip people up on their way. So we need to get them there as quickly as possible. The area has to be well lit and easily identifiable with highly visible signage. Unfortunately, the sign is usually broken in the dirt or backwards or upside down, or you know, not the right type of signage. So check for proper signage. Make sure it's the appropriate type for the equipment. We don't want to put an Eyewash sign where there's a combination unit or a combination unit sign where there's an Eyewash. We don't want people to get false expectations for the type of emergency equipment they're trying to reach, right? And it has to be highly visible, well lit, because we want people to be able to easily identify it, quickly move to it, and not have to second guess themselves, right? It has to deliver flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes. The test for that's pretty obvious. You're gonna have to run the piece of equipment for a full 15 minutes. Upon the initial installation of a piece of emergency equipment, it should be run for full 15 minutes anyways. Make sure it can do so. That it's the unit's not going to starve towards the end of the 15 minutes and things like that, and it's going to run properly. But that's mostly towards your annual inspection. We have to run that piece for a full 15 minutes to make sure it can do so. The outlets of the equipment have to be protected from airborne contaminants. Just make sure that all the dust covers are in place. That's both for the outlets for the water. Shower head doesn't count. The nozzle is facing down, so there's no need for a dust cover. The dust isn't going to collect up and into the shower head. So we're mostly looking for outlets for the water for the Eyewash heads, face wash heads, and of course stored flushing fluid. So if you have a tank, self-contained Eyewash, safety shower, and things like that, we have to make sure that it doesn't have any openings where dust and debris can collect, maybe from a process in your facility or just dust. So we want to keep all that out of the water. The dust covers also must be self-removing. If it takes you an extra step after activation to remove dust covers from your equipment, and I've seen some interesting stuff in place, people using creamer packets to replace a dust cover, hair nets, all kinds of stuff. It cannot take an extra step to take that stuff out of place, or it could just be older and rusted and difficult to use. So it's got to be self-removing on activation and not acquire any other assistance. The unit must go from off to on in 1 second or less, and it has to remain on without the use of the operator's hands. Okay, to test this, just evaluate the activation, ensure that water flows in 1 second or less, and I'll show you how to do that in these next steps, kind of all in one clean step. But as you can see here in the video, the shower is being turned on. It's going on immediately. Once it is on, it can be used entirely without the use of his hands. Now, this is really important because you're going to have extra steps that you're going to have to take. You're going to have to remove your clothing. You got to be in your birthday suit. Contaminants and chemicals can get trapped between your clothing and your skin. It is really important to get that off. You're going to have to hold your eyes open. And unfortunately, self-closing valves used to be a very popular thing. So if you see a big spring on there and the shower closes, the valve closes itself, the Eyewash closes itself, those, you have to do away with those. And we can update those for you, just give us a call, but it's very important we get those replaced. I mean, I can you know, pat my head and rub my belly, but I can't hold a shower open, hold an Eyewash open, hold my eyes open, remove my clothing, and do all of these things at the same time. You're gonna have more important things to focus on. Each of these pieces of equipment has a minimum amount of water that it has to provide. Eyewashes have to deliver a minimum of 0.4 GPM gallons per minute. So you can see there in the photo, it's just 2 streams of water, 1 for each eye, and that has to meet 0.4 GPM. In the center there, we have the face wash. It's covering the eyes, but it's also gonna focus on your face too. This is a minimum of 3 gallons per minute because of the additional water for your face, the area surrounding your forehead, your nose, your cheeks, your mouth. And drench showers have to deliver a minimum of 20 gallons per minute. Now, all of these are bare minimums. Unfortunately for us, there are no maximum amounts in the standard for this equipment, although I'd very much like there to be, because that's how we get injurious flow, things that are going to damage you when you use them. And so we try to stick as close to these minimums and use the water effectively as possible. But unfortunately, some emergency equipment just pumps out as much water as possible. And I'll show you some examples here coming up. Now, the equipment has to provide a controlled flow of flushing fluid at a velocity that is low enough to be non-injurious to the user. Now, it's hard to gauge that for a shower. Eyewashes and face washes are really obvious. I like to call those brain washers. And again, I've got some examples coming up. But try to imagine yourself in an emergency situation where you've been sprayed with an acid, a caustic chemical, or substance, and your skin is, well, it's going to be in a really unfortunate state. And you have a 30 to 40 gallons of water dumping on top of you from an emergency shower. That is going to hurt. It's going to feel awful. It's going to force the user out of the equipment way too soon. and they're not going to get the first aid that they're going to need. So we want to make sure that it's at a controlled velocity, both from the shower and the eyewash. Now, this is just confirmed by ensuring that the flow rate from the shower or the eyewash or eye face wash and the pattern requirements are met. And I'll show you how to do that. So just a reminder, minimum flow rates, 0.4 for an eyewash, 3 for an eye face wash. You can see too much flow or injurious flow there on the left. This is what happens when too much water is plumbed to it. There's no flow controls in place, and this can really do some damage to the soft tissues of your eyes. On the right there, this is a really unfortunate situation. Too little flow can be just as dangerous. Now, unfortunately, in a situation like this, you're not going to be able to use both sides at the same time. You're going to have to pick whichever eye is your favorite and pick which head you're going to use, unfortunately. And we don't want to force people into that situation. So we have to make sure the equipment's working correctly, it's installed correctly, it's pumping out enough water to sustain the equipment the way it's designed, and make sure that it's not pumping out too much too. And flow controls are a really important way to accomplish that. Now, the flushing fluid shall cover the areas between the interior and the exterior of a gauge at some point less than 8 inches above the eyewash nozzle. And I have a little video on the, I think it's the next slide. I'll show you how to do this. But this is the eyewash gauge. This is our 9015 eyewash gauge. This is taken directly from the ANSI standard. And directions for how to use it were also given to us. That drawing there on the right is straight from the standard. They showed us how to make this, and the measurements, the eye circles that are on this gauge are based on average human anthropometrics, which is just measurements of the human body, right? That's average human eye spacing. Now, in using this gauge, what we're accomplishing is making sure that when it's used, you're measuring 8 inches above the nozzle, you're slowly lowering it. The eyewash streams have to meet those eye circles. And that's just ensuring that the equipment is usable. That if somebody goes and activates this equipment, that you are going to be capable of flushing your eyes out with it. Now, if it doesn't meet the eye circles, you're not going to be able to use it correctly, and steps have to be taken to correct that. So use a tape measure, measure to 8 inches. The gauge is about 6 inches long. It's got a little ruler on there. So start above that if you don't have a tape measure on hand. But any point between the head of the device and 8 inches, the gauge has to align with the water streams. So here's just a really, I like this view of it better. You can see the gauge is being used. It's under 8 inches, and you can perfectly see the eyewash streams line up with the eye circles on the gauge. So I'll just let that run one more time. There we go. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be used. Next, the flushing fluid has to be arranged so that the flow pattern coming out of the head is no less than 33 inches and no greater than 53 inches from the surface floor of the user. This is how we're helping to prevent injurious flow. And out of control flows, where you see the eyewash shooting, 20 feet this way and 20 feet that way, and it's going to hurt, right? And this is how we're helping to prevent that. So measure from the floor up to the very top of the water, and that's how we're ensuring that it's not shooting too high, it's not too low. The reason there's a low end to that 33 inches is because we don't want people to have a hard time holding their face in place and ensuring that they can use this. It also helps it to align with the shower if it's a combination unit, right? We don't want the eyewash too far away from the shower. If you're leaning down or trying to use a piece of equipment that's too low, the shower pattern might not be as effective as it should be. And I have those measurements too. There should also be a minimum distance of 6 inches around the eyewash or eye face wash head. And that's just to make sure when you go to use it, you're not going to hit your head on anything, right? And cause further injury. Here we go. So for the flow pattern, 33 to 53 inches, just get that tape measure from the floor to the top of the eyes, and then measure around the eyewash or eye face wash head around 6 inches to check for both of those. Really simple on that one. Now the shower, remember our minimum GPM for the shower is 20 gallons per minute. Now for a combination unit for simultaneous use, for a shower and eye wash, we're going to have 20.4 GPM. For a shower and eye face wash, we're looking at 23 gallons per minute. And that's just to make sure that we are going to sustain both of those during simultaneous activation. Now to test the shower, that's where the 5-gallon bucket with the 2-gallon water line marked, the shower sock and pole, and the thermometer come in handy. You're going to use all of those at the same time. You're going to toss the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket, put the shower sock and pole over the head of the shower. You're going to activate the shower for 6 seconds. You use your Mississippis and check that the 2-gallon water level mark on the bucket is met. And that's it's just like checking your pulse, right? The nurse doesn't actually count your pulse for a full minute. She just does the math. And that's how we're getting our 20 gallons per minute. So if we're meeting 2 gallons at 6 seconds, we're meeting 20 gallons at 60 seconds. Okay. Also hold that shower sock firmly. Not all emergency showers are created equal. It could be really easy on the Haas unit, but if there are some out there that'll knock that thing right off that shower head. So hold it nice and tight right above the rim of the shower head. That's coming from experience. The shower flow pattern is also really important. So the shower has to provide a column of water that is 20 inches wide at 60 inches above the surface floor of the user, okay? And this is to make sure, again, that we're just meeting average human anthropometrics. So if you're standing, almost like this gentleman in the left photo here, if you're standing underneath that flow pattern, it's meeting you shoulder to shoulder, it's covering your entire body. The center of that flow pattern also has to be clear of any obstructions from 16 inches from the center of the column. And again, that's just making sure your body's going to fit entirely in that stream. There's nothing obstructing you and preventing you from using it correctly. To measure this, just take a tape measure up to it. Measure 20 inches or 60 inches up on your body. And then I approach the shower pattern and measure across where I measured up to on my body. And it helps me to really get a good read on the shower flow pattern. Now, obviously, this requirement requires you to remove the shower sock. You can't test this with the shower sock in place. And if you're in a lab, school, that can be really pretty difficult to do. If you're in a sensitive area, if there's sensitive electronics around and things like that, sometimes this can be a really difficult one to accomplish. So, but you have to have the shower sock out of place, obviously. Now the shower head has to be 82 to 96 inches above the surface floor of the user. To test this, just take the tape measure from the surface floor of the user where you're standing and measure up to the outlet of water, okay? Not necessarily like the shower head, but wherever the actual water is coming out of the shower head, that's what we want to measure to. The pull rod also cannot exceed a height of 69 inches from the surface floor of the user. This is just to make sure that it's easy to assume that the taller amongst us can reach the pull rod at any height, right? I can reach up, I can grab the pull rod, or I can reach really far down and I can grab the pull rod. The shorter amongst us also have to be able to activate this equipment. So it can't exceed 69 inches, and that's just to make sure that they can also reach up, grab that piece of equipment and pull it. So it can be as low as you need it to. Just make sure it's not impeding your eye wash or eye face wash. And just use a tape measure, measure to the bottom of the pull rod. That's what we're looking for. Combination units and their components shall be capable of operating simultaneously and need to be positioned so that the components can be used simultaneously by the same user. This is one of the most dangerous issues that we find with emergency equipment. Is what happens is we have those minimum GPM requirements for the equipment. Those aren't being met entirely. Maybe the supply line is too small. Maybe there's obstructions in the piping. It's not getting cleared out on a weekly basis. You know, what happens is you turn on the Eyewash and it's working perfectly. Everything's fine and dandy. And then you turn on the shower head and it will starve the eye wash or the eye face wash. And now you have to make a terrible decision. You know, do I save my eyes or do I save my skin and turn the shower on? And you're only going to get one of those pieces of equipment to function at the same time. There has to be enough water so that both of those can be sustained for a full 15 minutes. And unfortunately, I honestly, I don't know what it is, and it amazes me that I still find them, but it's like some people just throw away the instructions when they get a new combination unit. The shower has to be directly over the eye wash or the eye face wash. It's intended for one person, not for separate instances. And they get installed that the eye wash is facing one way, the shower is facing another way, and they think they're for, well, you hurt your eyes, you go over here, you hurt your skin, you go over here. But it's for one person. Very important. So just make sure they're lined up correctly. If you're doing an activation, turn them both on at the same time and make sure there's no starvation. Shutoff valves, not frequently spoken about during a lot of ANSI webinars or just in general. I think it's really important. Shutoff valves, if shutoff valves are installed in the supply line for maintenance purposes for the piece of equipment, which they usually are, provisions have to be made to prevent unauthorized shutoff. This is usually in the form of a lotto device, a lockout tagout device. Or if there's already a lock capable valve in place, you have to have a padlock on it. And that's just to make sure that employees walking by or anybody isn't just throwing the valve off. We've run into that so many times. Or if maintenance was done and somebody just forgot to turn the line back on. Somebody's going to have an emergency, they're going to go to that equipment and it's not going to work. There's not going to be any water for it. So make sure if they're shutoff valves that they're locked open. The equipment has to deliver tepid flushing fluid. It's got to be between 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The standard used to just say it has to deliver tepid flushing fluid, but that was a lot of things to a lot of people. You know, big tough guys would be like, oh, I can take 50 degrees Fahrenheit water for 15 minutes, no big deal. And then you'd have guys like me that'd be like, burr, I'm out of here. The golden temperature is really about like 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's still not, you know, a nice hot shower at home. But it's not going to be so hot that it's going to agitate the chemicals on your skin, and it's not going to be so cold that you're going to risk hypothermia and other factors after the fact. So very important, especially if you're dealing with areas that have wind and other factors that are going to add a further chill factor to the temperature of the water. On the lowest end, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you still run a risk of hyperthermia if it's a much longer shower, about 30 minutes to an hour depending on the conditions. So try to aim for higher if you can, but at least make sure it's above that 60 degrees Fahrenheit. 75% of ophthalmologists say that having tempered water is very important, citing it increases the chances that a victim can tolerate the full 15-minute flush. It may also discourage users from removing their clothing and things like that, and we can't have that. You have to be able to stand that 15-minute flush and remove your clothing, and if it's too cold or if it's way too hot, it's unlikely people are going to do that. So this can be really quickly conducted. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a shower head in place and you're testing the shower, just keep the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket, leave it there for 30 seconds, pull it out, check the temperature. If you have just an eye wash or an eye face wash, place the thermometer into the stream of water in the bowl. If you don't have a bowl, set it on top of the head and just give it a couple minutes. You'll get an accurate reading. Employees who may be exposed to hazardous materials shall be instructed in the location and proper use of emergency showers. I call this the duh clause. You have to train your employees on how to access this equipment. It's vitally important that they know exactly where it is, exactly how it functions, and when you're testing this, just quiz your employees. Drop by, say hi, see how the kids are doing. Where's your nearest emergency piece of equipment? That's all you got to do. Ask them, where's the nearest piece of equipment? How do you get there? How do you activate it? Just quiz them randomly, and because you're gonna not always work in the same place of a facility every day, and sometimes facilities have different pieces of equipment in different areas, and unfortunately, not all pieces of emergency equipment are built the same. Some manufacturers have, gone away from what's most common, which is a push paddle and a pull rod. And so we want to make sure they understand how to activate the equipment, and quickly. We have to check for the need for freeze protection. Where the possibility of freezing conditions exist, the unit has to be protected from freezing. Very simple. So check your local weather patterns. If you're familiar with, your local temperatures year round, check in your worst time of year. Go outside or run cold groundwater out of the ground and see how cold it gets. And ensure that if you have a freezing environment, you get snow and things like that, that the equipment's protected. On the right here, this is an 8317 CTFE, and it is a cable trace freeze protected equipment. It has heat trace all around the plumbing inside of the jacket there, and prevents freezing down to, I think it's -30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is crazy. I mean, that's absolute freezing cold, but will prevent those pipes from freezing. And not to mention, you got to protect the pipes behind the equipment too, right? If that equipment freezes, there is no water that is going to come out of that equipment. That's going to be really dangerous. So this is Appendix B5. I mentioned this very briefly way earlier in the webinar when I talked about changes in level or changes in flooring or floor. A single step into an enclosure where the equipment can be accessed is not considered to be an obstruction. So you can have a change in level, a step up for this type of equipment, but it has to be an enclosed booth. Now, the reason for that, and the reason it was added after the fact in the appendix, is because we all kind of realized we can't manufacture this type of equipment to be flush with the ground. These booths are highly advanced pieces of equipment designed to keep the person that's using the equipment on the inside from getting too cold or getting too hot. So there are heaters or there are chilling units on these that create a tepid environment inside of the booth. And if we make it flush with the ground, there's no flooring, we can't really seal the compartment. So long as it's into a booth where the water can be trapped or it's an enclosed environment that's tepid and temperature controlled, then we can add one single step, okay? But that doesn't include normal emergency equipment. You cannot have a change in level. Another installation consideration in Appendix B5 of the standard, it's all the way at the bottom if you're curious, or if you're looking at the standard now. A door does not constitute an obstruction so long as it meets the following requirements. Now, the door on the right here is a really good example, but it has to be, number one, non-locking. You can't have the ability to lock that door, which on the off chance somebody did would prevent somebody from reaching the emergency equipment. The doors have to open in the direction of the emergency equipment, so you don't have to stop and pull doors open. The hazard has to be non-corrosive. So immediately, if it's a corrosive hazard, you have to have emergency equipment immediately available, and you can't be dealing with doors. It also has to be push bar or panic bar operated, or I call them crash bars. So if you're, and you can bet that if I were to get a hazardous substance on myself, I'm going to be running as fast as I can to the nearest piece of emergency equipment. And the intent is that you can crash and push open the door towards the emergency equipment. So long as it meets these requirements, you can have a door, but just one. And after all that, we're on to poll question number 2. Nicole's going to launch that for us, if you would please.
All right. What are you likely to do after today's webinar? Check all that apply. Do not answer if it doesn't apply to you. I also, while you guys are filling out your responses, I just want to share that the amount of questions that have come in have been great. There's so many questions We will try to get to all of these. I can tell you right now, we won't be able to get to all of these during the Q&A follow-up. But I also want to let you know that we will be sending a full Q&A questions with all of the answers in the follow-up materials. So if your question does not get addressed, you will receive a response in the follow-up materials in the next couple of days. Lastly, if you are unable to vote, I've received some feedback on the inability to provide responses to these questions. Just if you want to participate, send me your question or your answers directly and we'll capture them. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties and thank you for your participation. And I will go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, that's a bummer. If you're having a hard time using that, my information will be at the end of the webinar too. You feel free to reach out directly to me. Everybody else does. I answer ANSI questions all day long. So if we don't end up getting to it, or if you're having trouble, just reach out and we'll have a conversation. Okay, so moving on. Some recommended best practices. Okay, a couple things that I wanted to cover and to further help you guys out. Number one, if you've got emergency equipment in place, make sure that there's adequate space around the emergency equipment so that first responders have enough room to fulfill their duties, right? They're probably going to need a stretcher or possibly another device to assist the person that was just injured. But they also have equipment that they're going to need to use. And if it's a tight quarters type of space, they're going to have a really hard time delivering first aid or moving the victim. So also locate other first aid equipment near the emergency shower or the Eyewash. Make it a first aid location. That way, if there is an emergency and somebody's been injured and they needed the emergency equipment, it's all in one spot. And you can really quickly access your other first aid necessities that are near the equipment. And train employees on how to access and activate the equipment during the emergency. I mentioned that earlier. That's a part of the standard. It's just unfortunately not always followed, and I think it's really important. So ensure that they know what they're doing when they get to the equipment and where it is. This one, I just like to brag about this one. This is actually ANSI Z358.1 and is a separate standard, and it is color coding for hazards. Red being danger stop, emergency stop bar buttons on machinery. Yellow is a tripping, falling, or striking hazards. Orange are parts of machinery that or equipment that can cut, crush, or otherwise injured. And green, the color of a emergency equipment manufacturer whose webinar you are attending at this moment, is the location of safety equipment. Remember to correctly code your emergency equipment so that your employees can very easily identify what it is that they're looking for, right? If you see green in a facility and you're in an emergency, you immediately relate that to first aid and safety, okay? So ensure that you're using the correct color coding. Correct equipment for the hazard. Make sure you're using an Eyewash for wood shavings, dust, airborne particulates. This is just for particulates that can get into your eyes, right? Nothing that can affect your skin. An eye face wash is for minor incidents affecting only the eyes and face. So minor pH incidents and things like that. Drench showers. This type of equipment is rare to find by itself, but it is a really important piece of equipment, and it's primarily designed for PPE decontamination or as a decontamination shower. So you're removing contaminants from equipment that you're using before you take it off. So it is safe, right? And then the combination unit, the ACE, it's for chemical exposures, for your face, for your body, and all of the above. Covers all the bases. On your tepid water range, 60 degrees to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember that water that's too hot can drive users unintentionally out of the equipment way too soon or agitate the chemicals that are on their skin. If it's too cold, you risk cold shock, cardiac arrest, and some other really dangerous issues. And it also may prevent the user from removing their clothing, which is, I can't stress this enough, it's really important. It's not time to be shy. It's going to be embarrassing, but it has to be done. And you risk hypothermia. Oh, and on the hot end, you get potential hyperthermia, which is the opposite. Your body heats up way too quickly. So ensure that we're keeping that tepid water range. Aim for 80 to 85 degrees. Even your average residential shower is about 105 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can imagine 80, 85 degrees is not going to be the warmest thing, but it is going to help keep victims in the equipment, and it's going to help prevent Legionella too. Unfortunately, Legionella bacteria growth thrives and dips into our ANSI tepid water range, that 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It thrives at 95 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're right in the middle of that ANSI tepid range, you're going to be at a pretty safe temperature range for the water delivery. Poll question number 3, Nicole. Whoops.
Sorry. Of course, my dog is going to go ahead and bark as soon as I hit the unmute button. So the third question is, would you be interested in learning more about tepid water solutions? I've had a handful of questions come through regarding tepid water requirements. So I think it's definitely a good piece of the standard that could use a little additional information. So I'll give you just a few more seconds here to cast your vote. Again, sorry for the loudmouth dog in the background. All right, thanks, Justin.
Thank you. Your dog gets a pass. He's a cute puppy. All right, moving on. We are gonna go to, additional best practices. So just a couple things that I like to mention on a regular basis when it comes to using emergency equipment. Remove your contacts. Don't rub your eyes. Contaminants can get trapped between the contact and the eye. Disrobe completely, including your socks and shoes. You might be standing on gravel, on dirt, on grading, and it's probably going to hurt and it's going to be uncomfortable, but it is really important that you get that off, especially your socks and shoes. It's one of the things people end up leaving on, and all the contaminants are going to run into your socks and shoes and continue to do damage. Provide privacy curtains. This is potentially one of the worst days of your coworkers' lives, and we might want to give them a private place to receive first aid. There's even a pocket on the inside with a robe for afterwards. Do bump tests before high-risk tasks. If you're doing something particularly dangerous, go check the emergency equipment real quick. Throw on the Eyewash, throw on the safety shower real quick, just on-off. Make sure that it's working correctly, and then go do whatever incredibly dangerous thing it was that you were gonna do. Be cautious while assisting not to contaminate yourself. So if your coworker is contaminated, it may not be prudent to grab them and guide them. You might have to verbally give them instructions. Also ensure that the signage is in use is the correct type of signage. Again, don't use an Eyewash sign if there's just a shower in place. Don't use a shower sign if there's just an Eyewash in place. It just doesn't make sense. It could give false expectations when they need a completely different type of emergency equipment. Okay, that's it for my best practices and the ANSI portion. This is something I personally oversee at Haas, and it is near and dear to my heart, and I like to talk about it every webinar. This is my ANSI emergency shower and Eyewash survey program that I run. I do a lot of education on the ANSI standard, and fortunately, we have our representatives that are all across the US and Canada, trained by yours truly and our staff. And what it is a complimentary emergency shower and eye face wash survey that we have trained our representatives to do. And what this does for you is we offer a 1 full day of inspections of your emergency equipment, an inspection report detailing what it is that we found, an executive summary chart, just like the one you see here on the right, which is, unfortunately for everybody, this was based on an independent evaluation of over 1,000 pieces of emergency equipment and was the average compliance that we found. And it was awful, and stays true to this day with the hundreds and hundreds of surveys that we've done. So only about 12% of the equipment was fully compliant. Another 10% was just non-compliant based on a missing sign, dust covers were out of place, stuff that you could fix pretty easily. And then the big Pac-Man size portion of that pie chart was non-compliant for performance-related issues. The shower wasn't working correctly. The shower was starving the Eyewash. The Eyewash was shooting, 20 feet into the air and had injurious flow, those types of issues. Or there was no water at all. And it was unfortunately way too common. And a lot of that's just due to lack of testing. So we won't leave you just sitting on all these issues. We'll give you recommendations on how to fix all of those issues that we find. We'll provide a debriefing meeting and a web conference to discuss what it is that was found, how to fix it, and how to further stay in touch with us so that we can assist you in any way that we can. This is what we do. And we're really happy and really proud of facilities that we can help into compliance as best we can. Restrictions do apply, but that's really just if you're in an incredibly remote area, or if you just have one portable Eyewash on the wall. But reach out to us, fill out the form. It's at hosco.com/survey. It can be found really easily on the website, and I'll reach out personally, and we'll have a discussion about surveying your facility. So with that said, Nicole, if you would launch poll question number 4, please.
So would you be interested in a free site survey of your existing emergency equipment? And I've received a few questions here about testing requirements. So this is a great opportunity really to have someone come out and take a look at your equipment and really guide you on their recommendations based on what they see out here in the field. So I'll just give this one more quick second and close this up. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Nicole's going to take over for just a second here. We've got the Q&A coming up, and I'll get to I answer questions for a while. Nicole has one more thing she's going to cover, and we'll move on to the Q&A section.
Thanks, Justin. And this really, I've seen, again, we are having so many questions come through in the private Q&A section. So, and a lot of these questions pertain to what you need to do these surveys or to do these testing weekly, and what do we offer to help. So this is the perfect example as to what HAWS provides that really not any other manufacturer in this industry can provide. And what we do is we provide a really comprehensive offering with in-depth on-site evaluation and testing. Really, we have experienced safety experts out in the field that really work with facilities to make sure that they're protecting their investment. That statistic that Justin showed in the previous slide is a pretty glaring statistic for equipment that just is non-compliant. And not only are you exposing yourself to financial risk, but you're exposing your employees to really a lot of safety risks. So especially as the economy is starting to open back up and people are heading back to work, one thing to consider is that the ANSI testing, the weekly testing, has not been exempt. It really is something that actually you need to continue to do. So weekly testing is not something that has been put on the back burner. It should be continued to be done. So as you open up your facility, as you head back to work, this should actually be a concern. Again, we have a really unique offering with our HAWS services program. We have teams that can go out and we can do your weekly and annual inspections for you. We can help train your team. I have received questions in the Q&A here regarding education. We do provide an online competent training inspection and certifications. So we provide from HAWS Services a wide gamut of support to really make sure that A, you're protecting your investment, B, you're protecting yourself from hefty fines, and C, and the most important is that you're protecting your employees. So again, really robust service. We're the only manufacturer in the industry that provides a service as comprehensive as we do. So again, we are here, we can partner with you, and again, we are available. So that leads me into our last poll question, which is, would you be interested in learning more about how HAWS services can help you achieve ANSI compliance? I'll give you just a couple more seconds. I know we're running over here, and we are going to touch on just a very few questions because, again, there have been such an overwhelming amount of questions, so we'll just touch on a few here, and then we'll make sure that we provide you with a thorough response with the questions that were asked and a response to all those. So I'll go ahead and close this poll, and we'll hop right into the Q&A.
I agree, and we usually have a FAQ, and but I'm just going to skip that. We'll skip straight to your questions. I'll answer quite a few, but remember, we'll follow up in the email with the questions and answers, and make sure you have a list of all of those. So here we go.
Okay.
Nicole, go ahead.
Sorry, okay. And again, so with our contact information up here, if there's anything additional, any additional questions that you have, send them to Justin. There's HAWS customer service. I've shared my email with a couple of individuals in the queue. So again, very responsive. We want to make sure that we're providing you not only with the best support, but also really the education to make sure that you are armed with the knowledge to do these inspections and really make sure that your equipment is meeting ANSI compliance. So I will quit rambling, and the first question is, how do you determine the flushing duration for any one device?
Oh, for clearing out the dead leg. This can be pretty difficult to do in some facilities, as you can't actually always visually see where the dead leg is, how long it is. When it comes to that, if you can visually see the dead leg and you can kind of guesstimate how long it is back to the source, it can be easier to determine how long that needs to be if you do have discolored water. So turn it on until the discolored water disappears, and count down. And that's usually about how long your dead leg is, because that whole line is going to be discolored. But if you can't see the actual line, just as like a safe bet, if you're doing it on a weekly basis, flush it out for 30-ish seconds, just to be safe, because you don't always know how long that is. So it can be really difficult to determine unless you can visually see it. So if it's behind the wall, give it 30 seconds and flush it out. And if you're doing that on a weekly basis, you're gonna be cleaning out the dead leg pretty proficiently.
Okay, this one goes back to tepid water. Do you have a suggested location to install the temperature mixing valve?
Yeah, so as close as possible to the emergency equipment. Uh, our mixing valves are, they're pretty amazing devices, but we want the hot and cold water mixed as close to the emergency equipment as possible so that you're very quickly getting to tepid water. There's nothing in the ANSI standard that says that I have to have tepid water within 5 seconds, or I have to have it within 1 minute. But to be fair to our victims and our coworkers that are going to be using this equipment, we want it as fast as possible, right? So if you can manage it, put it as close to the emergency equipment as possible. If that can't be done immediately adjacent to the equipment, above it, behind it, then just do your best to get it as close as possible. That's particularly difficult if you're feeding a few different pieces of emergency equipment. So if you have one mixing valve that's feeding 2 eyewashes, you'll probably want it to be directly between the 2 supply lines or something like that. So, but we can always help with that too. Also, our HOS integrated guys are great at mapping that out, giving advice on mixing and providing and adding instantaneous heaters and things like that.
Great. So this is one, what are the documentation requirements for the weekly inspections?
Oh, well, there's nothing in the standard that says specifically what that documentation has to be. It's just saying that you have to do your tests. But OSHA, if OSHA's going to visit, and specifically they're going to ask about emergency equipment, one of the first things they're going to ask for is evidence that you're doing weekly and annual testing. So we provide like a waterproof test tag that's really handy for use, but if it can be electronic, it can be paper. It's typically a date signed by the employee right there at the piece of equipment. So when you visit it, you can visually see, oh, this is being checked on a weekly basis. But keep those tags for a couple years just to be safe. That way you have sufficient evidence. OSHA shows up and you can immediately hand them the evidence that you've got a really healthy safety environment there, that you're doing these tests, and you have that evidence ready and handy for them. But there's nothing saying it has to be paper, it has to be electronic or anything like that. But you do have to keep those records for OSHA.
Okay, so this one is as far as basically when you are activating an eye or face wash in a shower, do you remove the clothes prior to activation or before they get into the shower or during?
During the shower. So your very first and immediate response, certainly depending on how far away you are from the equipment. If you're on your way to the equipment and your clothing has been sprayed, you really need to focus on getting to that equipment as quickly as possible. And removing your clothing on the way to the emergency equipment could really prolong that. If you're ripping a shirt off or trying to hop around and take your shoes off or boots and things like that, that can prolong the amount of time it takes for you to get to that emergency equipment. And when it comes to corrosives and things of that nature, every second absolutely counts. So get to the emergency equipment as fast as you can, beeline it, and then activate the equipment and start removing your clothing. So there's no one clean answer. It really depends on the emergency that you're dealing with and how dangerous it is. But my advice would be get to the equipment as fast as possible, activate it, and then start removing your clothing.
Great. And then I'm going to go ahead and end it with this last question here. And the question is, can a drench hose equipped with eyewash heads complying with flow rate and a hands-free activation valve replace a fully plumbed eyewash?
Yeah,
So can
absolutely.
a drench hose replace a fully plumbed Eyewash?
It can. So this is a kind of a tricky question, in that the drench hose can absolutely replace an Eyewash. It has to have an Eyewash or eye face wash head, right? It has to rinse both eyes at the same time. It can't just be a single nozzle, like your typical drench hose. So it has to have an Eyewash or eye face wash attachment. But so long as it has that stay open valve, and that it can be wall mounted or deck mounted, so that once activated, you're not holding it, then yes, that would be a compliant Eyewash or a compliant eye face wash. But the second you go to a drench hose and you grab it and you pick it up, you take it off of its mount or you pull it out of the deck, it's no longer a compliant Eyewash or eye face wash. That's just a drench hose. So it's kind of tricky. It has to be completely hands-free, stay open valve, Eyewash heads, and you are fully compliant. Unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of drench hoses, they don't always meet those requirements, but it can definitely be done.
Great. All right, again, thanks everybody for the great participation. Lots of great questions. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can reach out to Justin or customer service or me with any additional comments, questions, and follow-up. But other than that, I think we are good to go. Thanks, Justin.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We had a huge attendance, so thank you so much for attending. Our next webinar will be on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we'll cover that in whole. Also, I wanted to mention over on the right side there, we have a live chat on hosco.com. It's one of our most important and helpful tools that helps you to get in touch immediately with our customer service team, who is amazing. And they can answer a lot of questions for you if you're not going to reach out to me directly. But remember, we're going to have all those follow-up materials, so we'll get you a lot of good follow-up material here shortly. And thank you for attending.
Everyone.
Appreciate it. Yeah, have a great week. Stay safe.